How's it going? My name is Lauren Fisher. I'm a creative director based out of Los Angeles, California, and I'm currently the chief creative officer at the Famous Group. And I'm super duper excited to be here with you today to talk about my most favorite software, which is Maxon Cinema 4D. When Matthias reached out to me to do this, I was felt like I was in a dream because for the longest time, and maybe even right now, I've felt like this sort of outsider when it comes to 3D. I've just sort of taught myself by throwing myself into the program. But it has now become, years later, such an important part of my workflow, and I use it all the time. So this really feels like a dream come true for me to be talking with you and being in the company of so many great artists at Adobe Max. So thank you so much for being here. First things first, I just want to jump right in and show you guys my reel, and we'll talk some more on the other side. See you in a second. I'm really excited to be here and honored to be here, especially because I've always thought of myself as a non-traditional 3D artist. I've been using Cinema 4D in my work probably for the last 6 or 7 years, which feels like a long time, but I'm always discovering something new in this program. So my background is in motion graphics. I started out doing broadcast design, and then over the last several years, I've been doing a lot of work in the sports world, doing open videos and projection mapping pieces and live events. I worked on a TV show recently, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I do a lot of live action directing. My work really runs the gamut. And for a long time, I just considered myself, I stayed away from 3D because when I first learned it years and years ago, I learned Maya, and which is a great program, but it just felt so non-intuitive. And I like to work intuitively. I like to play. I like to discover. I like to get my hands dirty. And for a while, I just thought you couldn't do that in 3D. And then Cinema 4D came along and really changed that for me. And it's just become, like I said, a huge part of my toolbox. It's like my multi-tool in my visual arsenal. I use it for traditional MoGraph projects, projection mapping, previs for some of the live action stuff that I do. Sometimes just I'll sketch out an idea, or I'll just get into cinema just to keep the creative juices flowing and just play around. It's great for so many different things. It's also great for people like me who often have really tight timelines and tight budgets. So I know that's probably familiar to a lot of you out there. So today I want to show you some of those techniques that I use to work with what you've got. That's one of my mantras. And sometimes you don't have a lot of time, sometimes you don't have a lot of money. So there's that part of it. But on the other side, I also want to talk about unique sort of capture techniques or elements that we can work with. So I want to talk a little bit about 3D scanning and some things like that, and just different ways that I approach creative ideas using cinema. I'm also going to try and show you all projects that use a lot of native tools. So I love GPU renderers. So Redshift is a GPU renderer that's amazing. You can make beautiful work with it. I love plugins and tools. I love Xparticles, but I'm going to try and just keep most of this about using standard render or physical render in cinema, and using a lot, like I said, a lot of the native tools. Just to give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today, the first shot I'm going to go over is from Greatness Code, and that is going to cover using the really powerful cloner tool to create a huge swath of surfers waiting for waves. And then the next shot we're going to work on is going to be another one from Greatness Code. And this one uses a really powerful tool, again, with Vertex maps and using fields to animate textures on. We used a bunch of really beautiful 3D busts for the whole show, and a technique I used to give life to the busts, and that was using shaders and vertex maps and fields. And then last, I want to talk about a really fun thing that you'll see a theme through my work, which is 3D scanning. I love bringing real life objects into these really abstract worlds and doing really strange and out of this world things with everyday objects or people. And it's just a way of sort of bringing together, as you can see in my reel, I love live action as well. Bringing together animation with live action and 3D scanning, bringing real world objects into 3D is just something that I think is really fun. So we're going to go over some cool ways that we can use 3D scanning just using our phones to get pretty nice quality scans. So let's jump right in and talk about this first shot, which is from Kelly Slater's episode, world famous surfer Kelly Slater. He talks about how he was at Pipeline, which is a huge competition. This was his dream competition, and how crowded it was. So we had to figure out how to make a crowded ocean surface, you know, picturing just hundreds and hundreds of surfers sitting there floating, waiting for waves. Okay, so here we are in Cinema 4D, and I've got this lovely 3D model of a surfer sitting on a surfboard. I created this using a rigged model from TurboSquid to get him in this sort of seated pose, and then this additional surfboard model, and just plopped him right on there. So the first thing we need to do is create the ocean surface. So the way we're going to do that is with a plane. And with this plane, we're going to make it a little bit bigger. So we'll make it 500 by 500. Cool. And so now we want to create, you know, a disturbance upon this plane texture. And we're going to use the displacer deformer to do that. So that's right up here, and you make that a child of the plane. And nothing's going to happen yet, because what we need to do is tell the displacer what sort of information to use to displace this surface. So we're going to use a shader for that, and that shader will be a noise shader, which is a really powerful shader within Cinema 4D with a lot of uses. But for now, what we're going to do, you can see as soon as we put the noise shader on here, I'm going to turn on the lines here so you can see this surface has sort of started getting this undulating kind of look, and we'll turn this up so you can really see it. So that looks cool, but it's not exactly what we're going for here. So we need to, first things first, add some more geometry to this plane. Give it some more segments. Let's make it 400 by 400. segments. Now we're cooking. This isn't exactly what we're looking for, but now we can see what the noise shader is doing. So let's go back into that noise shader in the displacer. Let's also turn down the intensity a little bit. It's a little too intense here. So now we can see a little bit more what that noise shader is doing. This is sort of ripply like an ocean, but not, we can do a lot better. So let's go into the noise shader. And there's all these awesome options here, all these different types of noise. You know, I think everybody has their favorites, but for this particular ocean surface, I'm going to use electric. And you can see just in the thumbnail there, it kind of has a little bit of an ocean look to it. And we're going to adjust some of these settings. So it's just a few more octaves here, a little bit more detail. And the big one that's going to be the game changer for us is global scale. So let's make this 800%. Now this is starting to look a little bit more like a bit of an ocean surface. So that's awesome. Next step is to get some movement going, get some of that undulating movement through this texture. So built into noise is animation speed. So that's what we're going to use to give this life. If we, put it at a high setting like 5, it's actually pretty sensitive, the animation speed. So, this is 5 is way too fast, and this isn't playing back at real time either. So let's dial this way down. Let's make this 0.3. It's a mellow day, a lot of waiting, not a lot of waves, a lot of waiting. So this looks pretty good. We'll stick with this. Maybe we'll go actually a little bit higher. Cool, that's good for now. Great, so the next step is we want to, I'm gonna just turn up the intensity again just a little bit here so we can see what happens. The next thing we wanna do is we want to make a bunch of these surfers and have them live on the surface of this oceany plane that we've made. So the way we're gonna do that is with a cloner, the magical, wonderful cloner. We just go ahead and click that, and we wanna make the surfer a child of that cloner. So by default, what it's going to do is it's going to give us 3 guys stacked on top of each other. What we need to do is tell the cloner we want to clone these guys onto an object. So let's go ahead and go click object here under mode. And then the object that we want to clone to is this plane. So we're just going to drag that down into this object box. And there you go. We have a bunch of surfers that are cloned along this surface and moving along with it. And they're obviously not sitting in the correct position, so let's help him out a little bit. Get a little air, rotate him backwards. Just do -90. Cool, so this is close, but one thing that you'll notice is because this is sort of such a tumultuous texture, we do get these really fast moments where the surfer might move quickly. And again, this isn't playing back at real speed yet, and it's too herky-jerky. So the way we're going to get around this is to do a couple of things. So the first thing is we want to go into our cloner, and we don't want to align the clone in this instance. So we're going to turn that off. And that's going to mess up our little adjustment that we did for him, but that's no problem. We'll just put that back to 0. So there he is, back to normal. And we want him facing away from us. Don't look at me. Cool. So now he's still aligned with the surface, but he's kind of just bobbing straight up and down. We're not getting as much of the rotation that we were getting when we had a line clone on there. So we can go ahead and bring that back in just through a different method that we can have more control over. So we're still getting the great up and down bobbing. Let's try and bring in that rotation by doing an effector on this cloner. So we're going to go to MoGraph effector and pick the shader effector. And I had a cloner highlighted when I went up and did that, so it automatically added that effector into this effectors box. So by default, we have scale selected on here. So you can see it's affecting the scale. We want to make sure and turn that off. And then we want to go, we already made an awesome shader for our displacer. So we're going to use that exact same shader with the animation on it and everything. And we're just going to copy it. So click that little caret there, copy this noise shader from the displacer, go back up into shader, click on the shading tab, and then we're going to paste the shader. So nothing is going to happen yet until we tell it what to do. So now we unchecked scale and we want to click rotation. So we want that shader information that's affecting this to tell the surfers how to rotate. So let's just dial up some of these parameters. The big one that I want is I want them kind of rocking back and forth with, you know, as things get higher and lower. So we're just going to have him sort of leaning back a little bit. And let's hit play and see if we can see. You can kind of see over here, this guy, well, definitely over here, he's now rotating forward and backwards with the movement. Instead of that sort of really herky-jerky movement, it's way more smooth. See that? So that's awesome. That's feeling more natural. Let's add some more surfers here. This doesn't feel crowded enough. We only have, back in our cloner, we have 20 surfers. So let's turn this up to 100. Now we got a whole bunch of them. And one thing we want to do while we're in here is let's change this instance mode. Once you start getting into a lot of clones, it might slow down your memory, and this might affect some of your options. And so it might depend on what it is you're doing with the cloner, but we're going to change this to render instance. So Cinema's not having to work as hard to remember all these, 100 surfers that we have out here on this water. So that's cool. We're going a little faster now on the rendering, but now we have a new problem that we have all these surfers. We have a bunch of guys that are on top of each other. So that is something that Cinema has an answer for, and that's another effector. So again, let's click on the cloner, go to MoGraph effector, and then this is push apart. So as you can see, it's automatically pushing our clones away from each other, giving each other space, floating off into space. So this is definitely the idea of what we need. It's not quite there yet. So let's make an adjustment and see if we can get it to work as is. This looks pretty good. Well, they're still kind of intersecting. So what we could do is play with the radius. So make these guys, get further apart. But what I'm going to do is there are some options in here. Change that back. We can actually, instead of pushing them apart, we can have them do all these other activities like scale apart and move along X, Y, or Z. But what we're going to do is hide. So we're giving these guys a bunch of space. If one cloner encroaches too much on the other, one of them's got to go. So we'll just turn this up to like 20 for now. So we are losing some of our surfers, but this way we don't have all those guys overlapping each other. One more thing before we get into lighting and doing some shaders for our ocean is I want to just add a little bit more randomness in their position. So I'm just going to click on the cloner, go to MoGraph effector random, and it has a default position setting here. So I just want to put some random rotation on these guys. Let's do sort of each direction, just really give them, well, can't go too far, but just a little bit more randomness. I think that's a little bit better, a little more natural. Cool. So let's add a shader to our ocean. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have the color, we have a standard material. And we're going to make that color just sort of this nice sort of sea green. And then reflectance, let's turn off specular, add Beckman, just something super shiny for now. And transparency, we'll click that and change the preset to water and the brightness down to 50% because we don't want it to be crystal clear. Maybe just 60%. Okay. So let's take that material and drag it onto our ocean plane. Cool. And if we hit render right now, it's not super exciting because we don't have any sky in there to reflect. We don't have any lights or anything, but it is cool to see the reflections in a little bit. We'll get to see a little bit more refraction of the little feet and stuff under the water there. So let's keep going with this. Let's add a sky so we can put some texture up in the sky and have something to reflect down on this water. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a sky object. So that creates like this big dome all around your scene. And then what I have here is an HDRI map, a big 12K one. You can buy these packs online. There's free packs some places, but you just load that image. So you go here and you go to load image and you put your HDRI into this channel right here and make sure and turn off reflectance from your material. So now we take that sky material and drop it onto the sky. And now we have a beautiful sky. You can see how it's affecting the color of our ocean surface here. It's like reflecting these beautiful clouds. It looks awesome, but it's not lighting the scene. So it's not, behaving like global illumination or anything like that. We're really trying to keep this lean and mean. So what we're going to do is create a physical sky. So if we go to create physical sky and click right there. So what you might notice that I already did is it covered up our beautiful cloud sky. So what we want to do first is just go on the physical sky, make a compositing tag, go into render tags and make a compositing tag here. And we just want to turn off scene by camera. So we'll turn that off, hit render. Now we see that physical sky is creating this kind of sunlight effect on our surfers, which is awesome. And there's a lot of fun things to play with within physical sky. You can change the time of day in here. You can, so like if we, make it early in the morning, the look of that sun is going to be totally different. Look at them. They're all in shadow, which is kind of cool too. So that's just a fun thing to play around with. So the first thing is that color of the sun is not correct for our sky up here. So what we want to do is we'll go into the sun and we can adjust this yellow color of the sun here. What we'll first do is we just want to make it a little bit more, a little bit less yellow and a little bit more of this kind of reddish, pinkish orange. We don't have to go too far to make this believable because we're going to desaturate it as well. So let's just take this hue correction here and just find kind of a more of a reddish kind of orange color. And now let's take the saturation all the way down to like 20%. So it's super subtle, almost like a pinkish color. So that's matching a little bit closer to the scene. Maybe we need to bump the saturation up a little more, maybe 30%. Yeah, but it's still, so now the issue, so that looks better, but now the issue is that the sun's not coming from the right direction. So we could play around with this time and location, but if we want to do it with brute force, which is how sometimes I like to do things in here, is we can just rotate this sky. So you can see this sort of little shape in here that's giving you the representation of where the sun is. So let's rotate this guy over here, see what happens. Okay, maybe we went a little too far. It's a little too far behind them. So let's dial it back this way. Nice. So this is cool. This kind of feels believable. Like the source of the sun is kind of coming from over here, which I kind of like. Let's dial it just a hair back the other way so we can see just a little bit more of these guys. Nice. This is looking cool. One more thing that we want to do, since we have a bunch of clones in here, a lot for cinema to think about. Let's go ahead and bake our cloner. So let's go to MoGraph Cache under tags. And then that's on our cloner. And what we want to do is build, and we want to hit bake. So we don't have any surprises in our render. And here you have it. This is the render with, all the full color in it, but I obviously went in for greatness code and did a lot of special sauce and making it black and white and adding grain and textures and all sorts of stuff. But it's always nice, even when you're doing that, to have the color information to get going from and manipulate. So let's move on to the next shot. Next, what I want to show everybody is how we worked with 3D busts in greatness code. So we had this idea that in order to bring each of the athletes into their story, one might think initially, oh, there should be some sort of character animation or something like that. And I didn't want to do that for this. I wanted this to really feel like it was their memories and their mind's eye that we were seeing, but we still needed to represent them somehow. So we ended up using this series of 3D busts and that were created by an amazing artist. And the challenge then was you have these busts. We weren't animating the faces and adding, bones and weights into the face. So what are some interesting ways we can bring life to these busts? And again, this was also a matter of time and budget, but also it was a creative thing. It was fun to try and figure these things out to bring emotion and life to essentially these sort of statues. So we have them crying, we have things being added, we put them on top of animated characters. We did all sorts of things with them. One of the things that we did for Shaun White's episode, the famous snowboarder, we had his sort of emotion play out as these sort of textures that were sort of wiping over his face as he was going through certain emotions. So at the beginning, he's in this pressure cooker, basically. He describes it like he's at Mordor. So we made this texture that sort of wipes on. It looks like he's sort of like on fire, molten lava. And then we used that exact same effect and tweaked up the textures at the very end when he reached the pinnacle and he made it to the Olympics. And this time it was hypercolor and rainbow and beautiful. So I want to show you guys how I did this effect using Vertex maps and fields. So let's check it out. All right, here we go. We have our super cool bust that was sculpted by an amazing artist named Orlando Salva. He created all the busts for Greatness Code. And this is our Shaun White bust. So we have the helmet and goggles. I'm just going to be creating this effect on his face, but I also in the episode did this effect on the goggles as well. So what we need to do first, the idea here is that we're going to have this, we have this base texture, and then we're going to have this secondary natural feeling sort of spread of a second texture over the top that's rainbow colored and shiny and bumpy and just super trippy and cool. So here's how we're going to do that is first we need to make the super cool texture. So let's create a new material, new standard material. Open that up. Go into the color channel. So here we're going to add the super cool sort of tie-dye feeling color with using the layer shader, which is a super powerful tool within the material editor to basically you're creating like a mini little Photoshop document in here where you can have different layers, overlay, multiply screens, different images, all sorts of things going on all within this one layer shader. So what I'm going to do is just play around with some Fresnel and a little bit of noise, my favorite guy, noise. So first we're going to do Fresnel and just go in here and let's swap these around. We can play with all these values later. So this is fine for now. Go back and let's add a noise. And go inside of the noise shader. And this is just like in the other scene where we have all sorts of different options for types of noise. This was electric, we used for the water. I'm going to use FBM for this because I think it sort of emulates terrain or a little bit of like snowy, chunky, sort of melty snow texture. So I'm going to take this and just turn that up to 250. And that's it in here for now. Oh, and let's do animation speed because we want this texture to actually have a little movement once it animates on. So let's just put this at 0.8. and go back. Let's set this to screen, and then put this at 25%. There's no secret sauce of what I'm doing here. This was just what I landed at, just playing around, experimenting, what I landed at. So this is not necessarily the way this has to be set up. So a second noise, so this is where it gets fun, is you can have more than one noise to make a more complex kind of feeling texture. So I'm going to go inside this noise, select FBM once again, and make this 500% instead of 250. And we'll put that at 0.8 for the speed. And we'll set this noise to overlay. Cool. So it's not looking super interesting yet, but there's one more step within the color, and that's where we're going to add this cool rainbow gradient hypercolor thing. And that is by adding one more layer on top of the layer. So if we go to texture and we hit colorizer, so this is going to be added on top of our layer shader. So this happens before the layer shader. So in here, we're going to add a bunch of different knots with different colors. So let's start here with some purple, super bright color. So it's already changing in here. How about some cyan? Maybe a yellow. Maybe a lime green, I don't know. Let's go crazy. And let's do like an orange. And then we'll pull that white out of there because that's boring. I think I do want to make this a little bit more of a yellow. There we go. Yep, that looks cool. Okay. So now you can see in here we're sort of getting at that kind of tie-dye kind of looking color scheme. So that's cool for now. If you go in and play with, and you'll be able to see the sort of response of it here, but you can go in and see how your shader responds to you pulling these different levers. And you can do that with this Fresnel. You can do it within the noise. You can play with the brightness and contrast of the noise. If you really like dialing all this stuff in, this is a great place to do it. So this looks cool to me for now. Let's go into reflectance, turn off default. We want this to be super shiny, so I'm going to add a Beckman on top, and then just turn that down to about 30%. And then all the other defaults are cool for now. I want to have a bump on this. I want this to have a little bit of a texture to it and not just be perfectly smooth. So I'm just going to go in and, again, copy that awesome noise shader that we created. I'm just going to copy that shader out of here. Not the colorized version, so click in here. We don't need the color information, just the black and white for this. So I copied this shader, go to bump, click the checkbox, and then paste shader, and you can see it kind of created that. If you watch right here, it creates a bump and a little bit of a texture on top of this material. There's one more step within this shader, but we have to do a different step before we tell the alpha channel what it needs to do. So the way we're going to do that, the way that we're going to draw on and have this color sort of seep on and grow across his skin is using fields within a vertex map. So really quickly, I'm just going to take, before we do that, I'm just going to drag this new texture on top of the white one. We keep the white one there, and here's the new texture. You can already see it's already looking super cool. And let's put a couple of lights in here. I'm going to actually delete this as well because we don't need that. Cool. So I'm just going to put some really basic couple of Omni lights with some shadow maps on here. So go over to the light and just put shadow maps and put a second light here. Let's just get a little fill light going on, maybe a little bit lower. This is not to be looked at for lighting. I'm just throwing these in here real quick so we can see what's going on. Cool, so that's fine for now. Cool. Let's get into vertex maps. So basically, a vertex map is just a way of storing vertex information, the little vertices on your geometry, specifically for the vertices. So it's similar in some ways to a texture map. It's telling whatever you want to move places, it's telling it how to do that. It's a map. And then I'll explain fields a little bit when we get there, but using fields within your vertex map, you can use this for all sorts of different things within Cinema 4D, but I'll get to that in a moment. So let's first create a vertex map for this bust. So right now it doesn't have one. We need to select the bust, and we need to go to points mode. So you can see all the points are selected, and they're not all selected, I'm sorry. We just click, let's do that again. So we're going to click on points mode so you can see all the little vertices show up. We don't need to click on them, we just need to be in this mode. And we go to select and set vertex weight, leave all the defaults and hit OK, and he's gonna turn red. Boom, okay. So that's good. This is one, so that means we've created this tag. There's a vertex map now on this geometry. And if we want to see the texture again without seeing the red, we just click off of it. So there it is, it's still there. This is just to show us the vertex map information. So right now the map is just all red, which isn't very interesting. We need to have a second color, which on a vertex map, you know, it's not black and white, it's red and yellow. So yellow is going to be that secondary color that tells whatever it is you're trying to do, what to do. So for us, we want to create a more interesting vertex map by using fields. So as I was saying, fields is a really powerful thing within Cinema 4D that's not just used for vertex maps. It can be used for MoGraph effectors, deformers. There's a lot of different modes within Cinema that use this awesome thing called fields. So we're just going to click on that checkbox, and it automatically gives you this freeze mode. So until we change anything, it's just nothing's happening. We don't have any movement here. So first thing we want to do is add a field. So there's all sorts of different shapes, boxes, capsules, cones, different ways of bringing on your sort of, you know, secondary bit of information, the yellow, as you're going to see. So let's do a spherical field, and automatically there it is. We're seeing, so now this is where the interesting stuff happens, is when we go from one color to the other, and where this is our A and our B sort of information. So let's take the spherical field and scale it down and push it back. We want this effect to sort of, we want this effect to sort of start from Sean's, as I call it, like his third eye. I want it to start sort of from his temple, because in the story, you know, this is really the moment where he's realized his greatness. He's you know, achieved, you know, that sort of Zen place where you just, you know, stop thinking and just start doing. So I think, you know, those kinds of things can originate from our third eye, this chakra. So this effect is going to start from here, right, sort of between his eyes. And so we can leave this spherical field right here, because I want to show you, without us doing much more, what will happen to the vertex map if we change one thing. So still, it's not animating. If I hit play right now, nothing's happening. But if I go and click on freeze and then change the mode from none to grow, something more fun is going to happen. So let me hit play. Now this vertex map, now it's growing. So it's spreading across. It's happening pretty fast. So that was like 36 frames that it did the whole thing. So I definitely want to change the strength of this. Maybe turn it down to 50% for now. Maybe even less, let's say 30. Go back and play. Cool, so that's good. That's a good speed now as we're sort of previewing things. So we're basically going from A to B, right? We haven't told anything yet. Right now, this information, this is not really happening with a shader. So if I try to render this right now, it's not going to render yellow. It's just going to render with this texture here, because all this is right now, this vertex map is just information. It's not a shader or an object or anything yet. It's just data. So what do we want to use this data for is the question. So let's jump to that part. We want to use this data to tell this shader to wipe on, and we are going to do that by going back into that material and going to the alpha channel. Hopefully you all listening to this are familiar with what an alpha channel is. It deals with transparency. So what we're going to do is add a texture to our alpha channel, and there is an effect called Vertex Map, and we're going to add that right here. Click on Vertex Map, and guess what? We're just going to drag this Vertex Map over into this shader, close it, and now if I click off of the Vertex Map channel, you'll see that now we have our white shader under here, and you can see just a hint where we have that spherical field touching. And if I move this around, you're seeing that texture is revealed wherever the spherical field is. So that's cool. If you want to just control this yourself and keyframe this and move it around, you can totally do that. But like I said, we want this cool growing effect. So we already have that set up here within the vertex map. And remember, freeze, we have it on grow. So let's click off of it so we can watch it happen. Hit play. Boom. So now this texture that we added the alpha channel to is growing over the top of this second texture. So let's just render this so you can see it. It's over his face now, but not down here. And this is cool. We're getting there. There's some more things we can play around with in here though, and the biggest one for me is that the edge of this is too clean. It's just, it's kind of feathered, which is fine. It's nice, but I think I want my edges of this to look more natural. So the way that we can do that is within the vertex map, we can add a shader field. And guess what's going to go in the shader field, you guys? More noise. So let's add a shader field, and that's just going to drop right on top of here. And we want to set that to overlay, I believe. I might have to go back and change that. And so what this is going to do is we first have to give it a shader. So why don't we go in and just steal our noise shaders again and see what happens. So we'll copy the shader, go back in here, go back into our shader field, and here's the shader little drop down, and we just paste that person in there. And let's see, it's not really doing that much. It's not pronounced enough. So let's see if we can't crank this up. Go into the layers, maybe we add some contrast. No, maybe we need to turn things off. Turn off the Fresnel. Just got to play around. Let's see. We'll just we'll ditch these other layers and just keep the noise, this middle noise. And let's go back in here and play with the contrast. You can kind of see a little bit is happening there on the edge. It's kind of eating away. But we want that to be more pronounced. Let me play a little further down here. The other thing that the shader field is doing, it's kind of slowing down the growth. So I'm going to take a look at that as well. So if we have it set to normal, it's just doing it wholesale. So we don't want that. We want to do not multiply, definitely overlay. So this is still feeling kind of too subtle for me. I went ahead and sped up went back into freeze and sped up the strength here, or up the strength. So because at 30%, the noise suddenly was stopping our effect too much. So we need to bring back a little bit of that speed. So let's just make this 50%. And so you can sort of see how the edges here have some noise on them rather than just that feathering, but it's still not quite pronounced enough for me. So I'm going to go back in here. Oh, you know what? I forgot. We have this set to 25%. That's why. There. That looks better. I still think it should be more contrasty though, so we'll keep tweaking this a little bit. Go back into the shader field, noise, and just keep cranking this contrast. Maybe the scale, no, make the scale smaller. About that. Ooh, okay, that's cool. Let's see, we might have to play it out again to get it to, there we go. There we go. Now we're getting that more organic sort of feeling edge to this. And it's going a little too fast now, so let's go back into our freeze, change the strength to 20. Yeah, this looks kind of cool. Let's render that. Nice. Cool. So one last thing we can do here is we can just animate the spherical field. So it's not just sitting there. We want it to kind of boop him on the nose and then start growing. So I'm going to scoot this out front of his head a little bit. Start that at 0, go in about 12 frames, and then boop him on the nose, and let's hit play. That's cool. I think it's still a little too contrasty, but let's go back into our noise. Turn that contrast down maybe. Lots of things to play with in here, so you could have a field day for sure. Ha ha ha. So yeah, this looks super cool. I think the only thing left that I want to do besides lighting everything better is I think I would add in a sky just to like pick up some reflections. So again, this is just like the previous shot where we need to make a new material, and we'll just add into the color channel. This time, instead of a cloudy sky, let's do I just got a PC. I'm still not used to working in a PC yet. We'll pick one of these. Let's see. That's one of these abstract ones. Studio Abstract 3. Lucky day. Here we go. Cool. So this will just give us nice little trippy reflections, and we'll take that material, drag it onto the sky, and we don't want that to render in our background. So again, we're going to go to tags, render tags, compositing, and turn off scene by camera. And we should have some cool, get some nice reflections in there, just to make this feel a little bit more visually interesting. And yeah, there you go. That's how it's done. Vertex maps and layered shaders. So the last thing I want to share with everybody is a technique that I like to use a lot, which is 3D scanning. As you may have noticed, my reel, at the beginning of my reel, you might notice there's a little 3D bust of me that I actually made a few years ago using a Xbox Kinect and a piece of software called Sconnect. And I just took it and moved it all around myself and took this sort of 3D selfie. And ever since then, I've just been super into 3D scanning. There's multiple levels of 3D scanning. There's highly professional 3D scanning where you get really detailed, beautiful meshes that have been retopologized, which means you have really nice clean textures and things that can be rigged and used in animation. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, and that I'm going to share with you quickly, is that you can, using your phone, create pretty decent 3D scans of everyday objects, anything around you, and even people, if you can get them to stay really still. But I did a test here with my favorite basketball shoe of all time, the Air Jordan 6, and I'm just going to show you really quick what kind of scan quality you get from an app like this. This one is called Turnio, and there's another one called Scandy. Those are both iPhone apps. There's several out there, and you can even use your Xbox Connect if you'd like to. So lots of different ways to get scans, and it's nothing to be afraid of if you're, not a super heavy 3D person. This is a really fun thing to work with. So let's dive in and look at what we got from this scan. All right, here is on the right is the scan that I got from Trinio of my shoe today, and this is how it came in, and it's pretty clean actually. There's a little bit of cleanup that needs to be done just initially, just sort of like selecting these points and deleting them. So I did that on this one over here. There's a lot more in-depth stuff you can do to clean up a model and fill in gaps, but for this exercise, we're not going to go through those steps, but we are going to just take a look at the quality of scan that you can get and just how much fun it is to just basically take a 3D photograph of something and almost immediately have this scan in Cinema 4D to play with. I just think it's like totally mind-blowing. So the issue, if we have more time, I think, that I would fix is that we have a nice hole in the bottom here of our beautiful Air Jordan 6. I think, for us and just playing around, like I said, it's totally fine, but there are some relatively simple ways to go through and just clean up this mesh and fill in those gaps, which you'll want to do if you're going to be doing anything serious with this. But what I just want to do for today is just kind of make a fun little setup here, just to show you how quickly Cinema can handle dynamics, and just, we're going to make a butt ton of these shoes and then just drop them onto a plane, because dynamics are super fun. And let's just hop in and do that real quick. So here, let's create a plane first of all and scale it up. And this is going to be what our shoes drop on. And then let's go ahead and make a cloner object. Make the shoe a child of that cloner. And let's rotate these guys 90 degrees. And this time let's do a grid array. So we want like a nice bunch of them. And another thing that we would probably do is make a left and a right shoe. That would probably be a good thing to do, but these are all left shoes. Let's just go for that. Let's see, let's make a stack of these. A nice, bunch of shoes. Okay, cool. Let's just scoot back a little bit for now, and let's pull this cloner up here. And this is how quick and fun dynamics can be. If you haven't played with dynamics yet in Cinema, it can be a rabbit hole because there's so many settings and there's so much fun stuff you can do. But let's just have it so all of these shoes just plop down onto this plane and just sort of come down in a big heap of awesome shoes. So first thing we want to do is make this plane a collider. So we're going to go to tags, simulation tags, and collider body. And then we need to make the cloner, not the shoe, but the cloner. We want to go to simulation tags again and make that a rigid body. There's also soft body dynamics, and we won't get into that today, but that's what it sounds like. It's more squishy, soft. And then there's cloth as well that you can play with, but we're just going to keep these hard shoes. And so we've put the rigid body tag on here. Let's just go back and hit play and see what happens. Nice. So they're already, doing something kind of fun and cool, just falling in a heap on top of each other. That's kind of cool. If we want to play with some settings in here, we can add, some drag. We can play with the bounce, if we want to make this more bouncy. The shoes themselves, we want to make them more bouncy. That's going to affect, both of these things are going to affect the memory a little bit, but cool. We'll just go back to how it was. And maybe a little less friction. Make them slide around a little bit more. Cool. And let's create a you saw a hint, but let's create a nice shiny red floor for these things to land on. Love my Beckman. Turn this off, go to color, make it bright red, drop it on that plane, and so far so good. Look how nice the textures look on there. That is like amazing from a phone. Let's throw just an Omni light in here. Shadow maps. Kind of lift this up. Yeah, cool. So I don't know, I wanted to show everybody this real quick, that you can bring real world assets into your Cinema 4D creations really easily these days using these iPhone apps, and I just think it's completely amazing and like just loads of possibilities and fun in this world. All right, everybody, that does it for my presentation. I really appreciate everybody sticking around and listening, and I hope that no matter what level you are in cinema, that you maybe learned something or got inspired to try something new. That's really my overall parting message about being, a Cinema 4D, someone who preaches this, using this software, is it's really accessible. It's very deep and robust, but it's so accessible. It's such a fun world to play in, and I really invite people who haven't yet or are just beginning to not be afraid and not feel like you have to follow certain rules or do things a certain way. You can find your way within this software, and there's also tons of resources out there if you have questions or need help. This is a really great community of people, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. So that being said, if anybody has any questions for me of any kind, please feel free to reach out. And once again, thank you so much to Maxon for having me, and Matthias and Heather for being awesome hosts, and hope to see you guys soon. Take care.